And we are live here at Three Rooms Press HQ, where tonight we are going to be talking to Detroit native JAAN UHELSZKI and Loudmouth author Robert Duncan, who will be telling us about Loudmouth, Robert Duncan's autobiographical novel that deals with going from New York to Detroit and working for Creem magazine, of which JAAN UHELSZKI was a early writer and editor, and also a producer of the fabulous Creem documentary. So my name's Kat George, and let me introduce, here's Robert Duncan.
Hi, Kat.
Hey,
hi, Jan, wherever you are.
And here comes JAAN UHELSZKI.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dropped right in.
Trailblazing female rock writer. You know, she inspired me to do a lot of rock writing when I ran the Orange County version of the I magazine, which was, shout out to Randy Bird if he's out there, and Terry Houston. So I'm Bonnie Bird. So anyway, what we're talking about today is rock and roll, and kind of like when rock slid into punk, which was really started in Detroit. So we're gonna talk more to JAAN in just a little bit. We're gonna start off by talking to Robert about his book. So JAAN, you wrote a great blurb for the book in prose that's beautiful when it's not hilarious. This noisy, nostalgic novel tells how an excitable boy from a darkly conservative family survived childhood and then rock and roll. It's a wild ride with some amazing characters, and including a few you might recognize, and I'm in awe. So you like the book?
I love the book. In fact, when I was reading it, I kept emailing him like, is this true? Did this happen? I couldn't even tell. He blurred the lines so perfectly. I think it's all true. It's an amazing read. He's a great writer. He was always a great writer, which I probably tortured him a little bit too much because I was jealous when he came. But it's a great book.
Red.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. Well,
or maybe that's the heat.
I know how much you love green rooms, JAAN. So from having interviewed so many rock stars in green rooms, so why don't I put you back there, and we'll bring you back on in just a few minutes after we talk a little bit with Robert. Okay.
Bye, JAAN.
Bye.
After all that.
Yeah. Okay. So here's Robert Duncan, Creem magazine managing editor and author of Loudmouth. Ooh, I don't want to be big. I want you to be big. Okay.
Oh, that's much better.
Oh, no. There we go. And Robert, let's get us both on there. So tell us a little bit about writing. Well, before we get into this, let's start with watching the trailer for Loudmouth. Does that sound cool?
That sounds great, and I would just point out that all that music at the beginning is by Wayne Kramer, who is the founder of the MC5. Original music by Wayne Kramer. The back half of the music is by a group I was involved with. So,
wow. Okay, here we go. You ready? Go.
At a time of strife, let us look back at a time of innocence, of sex, drugs, rock and roll, attempted murder, bad faith, and very bad driving. The Clash, Stones, Springsteen, Creem magazine, New York, Detroit, Memphis, and Buck Teeth. Loudmouth, the debut novel by Robert Duncan.
Wow. Oh my God, that is such a great trailer.
Oh, yeah, that trailer was directed by and I worked on it with, but he held my hand the whole way and was a great director, was Scott Crawford, who was the director of Salad Days, a great about 4 or 5 years ago documentary about the hardcore scene in DC, hardcore music scene.
Right.
And he also did the Creem doc. So he directed and co-wrote with JAAN the Creem doc, Scott Crawford. And he was so nice to volunteer to help me out on that. And he got the Wayne Kramer music because Wayne Kramer did a bunch of the music for the Creem doc. Speaking of Detroit music and MC5 and proto punk and all that.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about the Creem doc in just a little bit, but tell me about a little bit about the what first turned you on to rock and roll, because that's what Loudmouth is really all about. It's coming of age and finding yourself through rock and roll. What first turned you on to rock and roll?
Simultaneously coming of age and never growing up. I think that Jan and I were talking about that recently. But I mean, it's kind of what
that.
It is. But what turned me? I had a brother that was about 12 years old, a half brother who was 12 years older than me, and I remember, and he was a real hoodlum. We lived in rural Minnesota, but he managed to be like the baddest ass in rural Minnesota. He didn't arrive at our, I have a whole brother and I have a half sister and a half brother. That my half brother didn't arrive till he was like 15 years old. So he was already, deep into teenagehood, and he wound up, fixing up a hot rod, and so tearing around town in the hot rod. And he also, in that hot rod, he listened to rock and roll music. And on the odd occasion when my mother could induce him to, take us, me and my younger brother, down to the drive-in or something for dinner, he would be blasting this music, and it was just, he was a terrifying driver, and the music was terrifying, and the whole thing. So my first exposure was like, I remember hearing Elvis singing Hound Dog coming from the dashboard of that car. I fictionalized it in Loudmouth, but I didn't fictionalize it much, like I didn't fictionalize much of the other stuff. But so my initial, encounter with rock and roll was in that, it was like a 32 Chevy or some crazy cool hot rod, and it wasn't it wasn't all shiny and nice. It was just a real dirt machine. It was just real funky. And so that was my first encounter, and I was shocked and terrified. And but within a week I noticed that I didn't notice. I went to a Catholic school with nuns and a parochial school, and the nun called home to my mother. I started adopting a new style of singing when we were in our little singing, music class, learning all the hymns and all that stuff. And I started singing like Elvis, that I had gotten that from the car. And here I'm like, 7 or 8 years old, and I'm trying to sing like, I do my little Elvis thing. And that was the one time I got nothing but trouble in school. But that was the one time the nun called home and said, "We think your son has perfect pitch." But really, it was the son. I don't think I have perfect pitch. No, I don't think I did then. Funny. I was just singing like Elvis, and somehow this struck her.
Well, speaking of singing, you talk a lot about, you grew up in St. Louis, and then you spent your teenage years in New York, and then eventually, when you were going to NYU, started a rock band that was pretty much, the things you were doing on stage were pretty much pre-punk,
proto-punk. Yeah,
proto-punk. Sure. So tell us about that.
Well, I think it was. Well, I started playing in rock bands when I was, 12 years old. I was sixth grade. It was the one band in our grade school, but I was in it. I after my encounter with Elvis, I, of course, then was just, my entire life was swamped by the British invasion and the Beatles and the Stones and all that. And so, so I played in bands since I was 12, and among the band, I was the first one whose voice changed. So I got elected to be the singer, and but that suited me. I was such a shitty guitar player, and so I became the singer. And as I got older, not too old, I started drinking a lot and carrying. I was always a loud person. and boy, I like to raise hell. So drinking and carrying on, and so we used to do gigs. I remember we had our biggest ever gig. We had gotten an agent, and we gotten a tour, and we were booked into the biggest club in Rhode Island, and which doesn't sound, but it was like 500 people. It was like, it was astonishing for us. And I remember that, so I'm climbing all over the amps, and I would go out on the floor and crawl around and pour beer on myself, and I would interrupt songs to interview people, and I would steal drinks from people at the bar, and I would go outside in the street, and it was all this kind of shit. And I remember years later, so we got dropped by our agent because we had so pissed off like people on the tour, and but I remember a year or two later, I mean, this was the early 70s, maybe 73. And a year or two later, with one of the guitar players that had played with me called me up and said, when punk arrived, he says, "Hey, look what you started."
That's right. That's right.
Now,
And,
I think it was a simultaneous discovery. I don't think any of the prominent punkers were in the audience in Rhode Island or northern New England.
Not then.
No.
But maybe, who knows?
Maybe.
You started, you talk in the book also about honing your writing skills a little bit in New York, and then you ended up in Detroit and hooking up with Creem magazine.
Yeah.
Can you read that part about Detroit?
Oh,
Tell
Detroit.
us a little bit about it.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, that okay. Now I have to. I'm wearing the shades.
Here's Loudmouth, by the way, in case you haven't seen it already. It's a beautiful book.
There it is. Somewhere.
There you go. All right.
Yeah. That Loudmouth is a fictionalized autobiography for sure. I mean, I can't deny that a lot of it has to do with me, but I got like a 3-minute little section here, and it was when I arrived in Detroit. I had done some freelance for Creem magazine and a few other places, and then they called me up and said, "Hey, you want to come here and be the copy boy?" And I'm like, yeah, well, I needed a job. I was living on my friend's couch, just like the guy in Loudmouth. And so I needed a job, even if it was a shitty paying job. But it was, but I was not a Creem fan. I came from the Midwest, but I went to New York, and I was, kind of, people, looked down on me because I was this hick from Minnesota. And so I tried really hard to be a hardcore New Yorker with a New York accent and all that stuff. So I didn't want to have anything to do with the Midwest. That's where I had come from. So, but I desperately needed a job, and it in here it refers to the brother being lost. That my older brother was also, he died young, of course, but not of violence or anything. He got sick, but anyway, so this chapter is called Bolos, which was the name of a beer drink. A super huge beer glass we used to drink from at our favorite bar. I came to Detroit, and then its suburb I'd never heard of. In deepest, darkest, freezingest, brokest, lost my brotherest January. Enough of a hallucination in the living, I can hardly tell where memory leaves off. The night Jim Morton and Lester Bangs picked me up at Detroit Metro, I didn't know much more about America's only rock and roll magazine than what I'd gleaned from scanning the newsstand in the Astor Place subway station, the only place in New York it seemed to be on sale. Awaiting my train home from NYU, eyeing the latest garish cover in the news kiosk, I'd still managed some authoritative conclusions. MC5? Stooges? Grand Funk Railroad? Are they kidding? Oh, and Alice Cooper. I mean, I liked all that gender bendery. I liked it in the Dolls, and before that, the Mothers and Stones. But when I saw Alice on Channel 11's no-budget Labor Day festival trying to make a point about stardom by hypnotizing a crowd with a pocket watch, it was just embarrassing. To me, a New York chauvinist as only a Midwestern arriviste can be, Creem wasn't about the music any more than the music was about the notes. Lester was the magazine's editorial supernova. He was brilliant, I could tell you later. I didn't know it then. I'm sure I'd seen his byline in Rolling Stone, but I'd paid little attention to the prose, probably because though he lived in El Cajon outside San Diego, about as far from Motor City as you could motor, any random Lester piece was likely to extol the virtues of Michigan Stooges or MC5. I was hardly a Lester acolyte. It didn't occur to me he would have acolytes. Creem, hick rag about hick bands, edited and in large part written, I would discover, by an irreducible hick, just didn't mean a lot to me.
Wow.
Almost done here. Slinging a Great Pine Camp duffel stuffed with everything of mine into a rat-trapped red Camaro stuffed with everything of Lester's, books, records, notebooks, shoes, T-shirts, greasy jumper cables, festering Jack-in-the-Box wrappers. I finally managed to contort into the back seat, and the three of us beeline to Pasquale's, the cheery family restaurant on Woodward near 13 Mile, where, inexplicably, the brain trust of America's only rock and roll magazine went after work to extend the party. In what will become a nightly rite, if not an opiate, I ordered the special spaghetti, red gloop in a mozzarella-topped casserole, pizza posing as pasta, and we all got bombed on supersized goblets of beer called bolos before stuffing back into the Camaro for the last mile to the communal cream house in Birmingham, an eccentric little burg on Detroit's vanilla fringe. I often found myself wondering, clomping through the foot-deep snow those strange first days in greater Detroit, how did I get here? Especially since I'd been headed to California.
Wow.
That's what I got.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was January. It couldn't have been darker or scarier or more, you know.
So speaking of Creem, we're going to bring JAAN UHELSZKI back up.
I gotta put my shades on again.
Yeah, but first, let's watch the trailer from the documentary. It just came out, during COVID, which is amazing.
Came out in August, yeah.
Yeah, but we're going to watch the trailer for that, and then we're going to talk about Detroit and Creem and rock stars and all this great stuff. So if you're ready, hold on to yourself, because here we go. It's incredible.
Creem magazine was our Facebook. It was our social media.
I lived by what was printed in Creem magazine.
It was a rock magazine with a capital R.
Most people want to fit in somewhere. I wasn't going to find them in my high school. I found them in Creem magazine.
Buying Creem was a little bit like buying Playboy. You didn't want your parents to see either one of them.
None of them had any business running, editing, or writing for a rock magazine.
We're going to introduce everybody.
Hi. What's happening?
What are you doing here?
I sell dope downstairs.
Oh, no.
Barry always had an explosive temper.
You got a newspaper to get out?
I had no credentials at all.
We were this team of people who were all a little off.
To put it in like a band comparison, that's when the band happened.
Creem magazine being based in Detroit gave it the grit.
If you live in the Midwest, it's not all laid back and peace and love and good vibes.
In 1971, the Rolling Stone party line was that the next big thing was James Taylor. Many teenagers went to Creem to learn about noisier stuff.
Lester Bangs and I started the same day.
He kind of liked going against the grain. What's popular? You guys suck.
Take Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Here is like musical sterility at its pinnacle.
There's no parallel for it in the rest of rock journalism. It was not a magazine that was about rock and roll. Rock and roll was taking place at the magazine.
Everybody was politically incorrect. That's what made Creem so good. He told the truth.
50 years after Creem's first issue published, it still stands for something. Either you're in on the joke or you are the joke.
America's only rock and roll magazine. Yeah.
Oh, how about that? And welcome back, JAAN. Oh my God. Yeah, I'm so glad that Creem's a documentary now. Jesus. So you started at Creem when, how many female rock writers were there in the world?
I didn't count. It didn't even occur to me that there were
I mean, like
some. Well,
one, two?
No. Do you know what? Detroit had the rock writer for the daily paper was a woman. So there was a precedent. Creem actually started with women doing reviews and doing interviews.
There you go.
So I thought, why not? And Roberta Kruger came about a year before me, and she was the original film box.
Wow.
But it wasn't that way. You know, it was really for Creem. It was anybody who'd worked cheap. I mean, we got $22.75 a week, and that's pretty much how I got there. That I'd work cheaper for free.
Oh man. Okay, so tell us the story. I'd like to hear you tell the story about your first Creem feature article about Smokey Robinson. This is incredible. So if you don't mind.
Well, I started as a subscription kid because when I got there, I was going out with Charlie Oranger, the art director, and I didn't have a job there, but I was always hanging around. So I said to Barry Kramer, the founder, publisher, I can make you some money. I have no idea where that came from. I was managing a head shop in one of the malls in Detroit, and on the spot, I came up with this light bulb moment where I go, I could actually start a t-shirt line. I could get them printed. I had a friend whose dad had a print shop. I could sell them in my store, which I manage, and I would give you all the money. And I have a little sister, so I'm going to send my sister and her friends door to door selling Creem t-shirts. I did all of that. My kid sister sold 1,000 t-shirts with her friends, and I got a job, but I didn't get a job as a writer. I got a job as the subscription kid. So I had to do all the grunt work. I had to box up magazines and send them to little head shops, which is so ironic, and to, smoke shops, and I had to fulfill the subscriptions. I was a terrible, not detail-oriented secretary type. I mean, I have a little too much of an attitude for that. And I'd always wanted to be a rock writer from before I even knew there was one. I went to New York when I was 14, and I was reading the East Village Other and the Village Voice, and shortly afterwards, this magazine, I Magazine, the first one, a Hearst publication, came out, and I thought, I want to do that. So everything I did after that actually aimed me to be a rock writer. I worked at the Grandy Ballroom, which was like a ballroom based on the Fillmore experiment, and I was the Coca-Cola girl. So what I did is I had to do two things. I had to make sure people didn't dose the sodas because we kept them out in the bar, which happened all the time.
Right.
And the second thing is I'd have to take sodas to the back room to the bands. So I just never had a fear of rock stars. It's like, okay, the Velvet Underground were a little unfriendly. But the most of the other bands were great. And we all hung out together. My friends went out with rock stars. I always had a rule I wasn't going to go out with a rock star, which I've only broken a couple of times. But it was just like, it just seemed just some kind of strange synergy. And what happened is I'd been at Creem for about a year and a half, and I kept complaining to Lester and Dave Marsh, I wanted to do a story. And they go, well, tell us something. And one day, Dave Marsh says to me, Smokey Robinson, so he knew that I loved Smokey, is going to retire from the Miracles. Do you want to go to the press conference with me? And I said, yeah, I would love to. Okay, I'll meet you here after classes because I was going to the university. And we got in the car along with Charlie Oranger, and we watched this press conference, and I was just heartbroken. I wasn't even ready for it. So that night I go home. I'm getting ready for bed. I'm in like one of my cute little gingham like bath robes. I mean, nothing rock. And David says, well, did you finish the piece yet? And I go, what piece? And he said, you're supposed to write it. Why do you think I took you there? I didn't have one Smokey Robinson album. I had nothing. So I got in my parents' car. It was like 11 o'clock at night. I go like the 15 miles there, 15 miles back. I stay up all night long, and I listen to every Smokey Robinson and the Miracles record. And I don't know, just out of that sheer terror, I came up with an open letter to Smokey Robinson where I'm pleading him not to go. I'm like name checking my elementary school boyfriend who broke my heart. And it's like, I just poured out my heart. And the crazy part was it ended up being the cover story.
Wow.
So I just never looked back.
insane.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was
That's
that
fantastic.
Cinderella. Yeah, it was a great moment.
And a good story.
Yeah.
You look back on it now, it's like, wow, this really was a good story.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, Robert, you came to Detroit from New York, and what set you talked a little bit about what the Detroit music scene didn't have really any interest in it at the time you moved there because you were being a stuck-up New Yorker.
I was anything beyond the confines of New York City was like whatever.
Yeah. What was it that got you turned on to Detroit music finally?
Well, and I never aspired to go to New York. To Detroit. I didn't actually aspire to go to New York. My parents took me there and I was unhappy. But I arrived in Detroit, it was really bleak. And then, I went into the office the first morning I was there. I was kind of stumbling. I had gone out drinking with Lester, and the real person was John Morthland, and got shit faced, and I'm stumbling around with a hangover the first morning, and that's when I met Jan. Jan was I was sleeping on the couch in this house that was nominally a Creem house, a bunch of Creem people or Creem friends, and I ran into Jan, and I thought, wow, I liked the Detroit girls right off, and anyways, I went to work, and I started. People were taking me around places, and we were going out every night, and I started thinking, wow, Detroit is really cool. Detroit has its own culture. It's not a lot of cities, at least in our country, have they're just distinct cultures, and Detroit is one of them. And it even had a certain kind of people in Detroit had a certain kind of personality. What Dave Marsh in that old clip from a TV show that Dave Marsh talks about, it's not all peace and love in Detroit. It really wasn't. There was this undercurrent of anger, and you see it reflected in the art, if you call Stooges and MC5 art. I mean, it really was a distinct place. So I was quite fascinated pretty quickly. And just like Lester, who had first dissed the MC5 and Rolling Stone and then fallen in love with them when he moved to Detroit, the same thing happened to me. And, I became a huge Stooges fan. And so I was, seduced into it.
Well, let's talk about the Stooges. I mean, do any of we've just put you two on and share some stories that about the Stooges in interviewing them or seeing them perform.
Okay, I got to start because I've got to riff a little bit on Duncan's last comment about Detroit girls. Okay, in the little trailer of the drunken cheerleader, that's Leslie, our receptionist, who I went to high school with.
Yeah.
When she got married and had a wedding shower, do you know what Robert did for a present? In lieu of a real present?
I was forced to. This was not my idea.
No, you were forced.
Oh yeah, I was.
He came in little Chippendale outfit and bust out of a cake. So
yeah, it was. Creem was an equal opportunity harasser.
That's right. Yeah. I knew the Stooges because my best friend Peggy Carlson was going out with Iggy before he became Iggy. So again, like I said before, I feel like I was always a rock critic in training. We used to go up to their house in Ann Arbor from Detroit. We would unforgivably hitchhike up there. And one time, right prior to the Stooges' first show, he makes Peggy and I go into the practice room, and I'm going, oh no, I don't think I'm going to like this, not at all. And we get in this dark practice room with the egg cartons, and he shoves a bass in my hand, gives Peggy the air blower, which you would see on stage, and makes us play, like play. Like we was not even talking. He was like a deranged man. And so for 20 minutes, I played bass and Peggy did the air blower while he humped a really giant amp. It was like, that was my introduction to the Stooges. And I never looked back because honestly, the last time I interviewed Iggy in 2010, at the end of the interview, he said to me, God, I got to take a piss. And I go, okay, I'll wait here. No. 6 inches from my open toe sandals, we're in Florida, he indelicately whips it out and pees so close to my foot that I'm like going, okay, that was a statement. Yep, that was a statement. This will probably be the last Iggy interview I ever do in my life. Okay, wow. 10 years later, 11 years later, it was. Wow. So Iggy is a universe unto himself, then as now.
But that scene with you playing bass with Iggy,
yeah,
and somebody else playing the blower, it's like, okay, if that isn't the roots of punk rock, I don't know what is. I mean, the whole what I always took to be that I thought punk rock should be, and I was, people who can't play playing.
Yeah.
So I mean, right there,
It was great, and I've always liked bass players. So,
yeah. so Robert, did you ever interview or talk to the Stooges?
I met Iggy one time when I was in Detroit, and I have a version of this story in Loudmouth, but I was supposed to interview David Bowie, and it was after he had played like Cobo Hall or something, one of the big arenas in town. He was big by that point. I mean, this is like 75 or something. So it was like maybe the Young Americans era, maybe. I can't remember what album was out. But so I was sent up and taken up to the Bowie's hotel room and told, well, wait for him. He'll be up here, soon. And so I'm sitting in the room imagining that I'm alone. And, it's kind of dim and dark. And then I realized, wait a second, there's somebody else in this room. And it was this little kind of, he was kind of little, and this little platinum-haired pixie dude, and he was sleeping on the other bed in David Bowie's room, and he turned over, and I realized, fuck it, that's Iggy. And he didn't say anything, and I didn't say anything. It was a weird situation, but it seemed, the Iggy universe was there.
That's amazing. I mean, my only Iggy story is like totally third hand. I had a friend, she was 16 years old, and she was going up to all the clubs in LA. And one night she slept with Iggy. And the next morning he turned over, he looked at her, he said, and nodded his head, and then turned back over. And she felt like blessed for years after that. Yeah.
Oh my God.
That's high praise. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So, when Creem was going out, music was started by, there was, of course, international acts in the music industry, but there was really a regional kind of, thing going on that isn't so much happening anymore, especially not during COVID. But anyway, but you guys did cover some huge acts. So JAAN, you were the queen of the high concept rock story. And I heard this the other day, you talking about playing on stage with Kiss. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that, because that's just such an amazing story. You, JAAN UHELSZKI, played on stage with Kiss.
Right. Incredible. It started with Iggy, right? I never drew that parallel before. Yeah, I was always about a high concept. Anytime, I did a DTO diet guide where I made, obviously fat guys tell me their diet secrets. So it's always doing something like that. I did a Kiss comic book before the Kiss comic book. So I was on to my third high concept story. So Connie Kramer, who was married to Barry Kramer and was eventually the publisher of the magazine, had just read this magazine article in Esquire where a woman, Blair Sobel, had gone on the road with Ike and Tina Turner and was an ICAT for a night. And she said, you got to read this story. And I go, yeah, this is amazing. She goes, could you do something like that? And I go, oh my God, in the New York Minute. So she goes, with who? And I go, oh, with Kiss. So they were still, you know, in their infancy, or not really infancy, they hadn't broken through yet. So I called up the head of promotions and I said, I have this great idea. I want to get on stage with Kiss and write about what it's like to be in a rock band. And because they were trying to break them so hard, they said, yeah, absolutely, no problem. You have one stipulation, you can't call them a glitter band. And I go, well, why would I? So I think it was just like a couple of days later, they were coming in to play Detroit. So I went to the sound check and I went up to the band who were huddled in one area, actually all of them talking. And I said, hi, I'm JAAN. I already knew them. I'd covered them before. I'm going to be up there with you tomorrow night. And they look at me like I'm out of my mind. Like they don't even know what I'm talking about. And that was it. So I watched them. I watched their sound check, and then then they play the next day. And then the next day, I meet them at the airport, and we're going to go to Johnstown, Pennsylvania, where they had that big flood years and years ago. And it's like, yeah, this is real. They still didn't really believe it. But when I got to the venue, they all made me up. I mean, they finally got it. Their manager talked them into it that moment. And they made me up. Each one of them, like the cover of Dress to Kill, made me put the makeup of their own insignia. So it wasn't really a pretty picture. I was a little bit of all of it. But the funny part was I remember Gene Simmons started making me up, and they got in a fight because they thought he was making me look just like him, which thank God he didn't. But it was amazing. I was so charged up. Like when they went to do the gig, I'm going right up there with them for the first song, and the road manager actually had to hold me back. And he said, no, you're just on for the last song. So I was in some weird hyper reality waiting for the last song. It was Rock and Roll All Night. And I got on. It has changed my entire life on how I write about musicians, because I felt that surge, that energy bot, like whatever it is that keeps bands going way past their sell-by date, because you can never feel anything like that. There's nothing that's even close to that. And I only felt it for that one song. And the crazy thing that just occurred to me years later is no one in that audience of 5,000 they didn't even notice I was up there. It was like no one ever wrote even to Creem or ever. There was no social media. So I thought it's like a stage moonwalk. Like maybe I really didn't do it.
Yeah,
So,
that's right. That's right.
A moment.
Wow. And then
and another good story, by the way. That Kiss story is great. And you can see JAAN in the doc. You see JAAN in her Kiss makeup.
Yeah. And Robert, you wrote a book about Kiss, right?
I did. I did.
Here we go.
Yeah. Well, you know, I took.
But it was like a satire.
I actually met Kiss really early on before I worked at. No, I guess I was doing freelance for Creem, but I was out in San Francisco for a short period of time. But I was out here and I got assigned to go see this band Kiss and hang out with them and do an interview and all this stuff. And so this must have been 1974, and it was had to be their first tour. They were opening act for I cannot remember who. I wish I could, but so I went to interview them at their hotel, and Paul was missing. And Paul showed up maybe 20 minutes late, and he had just come from getting that rose tattoo that he has on his shoulder that became kind of famous. He was showing us all his first and fresh tattoo. So that was kind of funny. And I went with the manager, Bill O'Coin, their storied manager, to the show, which was at Winterland in San Francisco, and it was like they had they were the opening act, but they had that Kiss sign, and they, I think Gene was, he was blowing fire, and it was just way more than you usually have with an opening act. And I, who was a rock and roll kind of purist, I liked the kind of studied thing, like that thing Jan talked about with the Iggy. That sounds great to me. And so I was horrified. This is like showbiz, these guys that they're signing all this stuff. So, but eventually so I wrote a lot of stuff when I went freelance, when I went to Creem, then left Creem and I went freelance, and I discovered that it was way easier to sell a story about Kiss in 1976 or 77 than it was about any other band. So I started just writing one Kiss story after another, and I would write a negative story one week and a positive story the next week. But all of it kind of way over the top. And eventually Richard Robinson, who we both know, who's married to Lisa Robinson, who was one of our writers, both of them were writers for Creem, said, "Hey, I got an inquiry about a guy who wants to do a Kiss book. You want his number?" And yes, I did. And that happened at an Ozzy Osbourne press party.
Wow.
Because as Jan knows, we all went to, you had to go to press parties because it was free food, because you didn't have any money. You don't make any money as a rock critic. It was free food and more importantly to me, free booze. So
right,
the party started at press parties.
So we have a question from the live audience. You guys both did articles for Creem, so here we go. It is, are there any bands or musicians you panned in Creem that you've changed your mind about over the years? So I'll let you guys hash that one out.
Well, I was certainly, I didn't pan them in Creem. I didn't have the platform, but I certainly was. I used to make fun of the MC5. I remember when Kick Out the Jams came out, I thought, give me a break. I just thought that was a bunch of bullshit, but I don't. Oh, I know. I did write a negative thing about Todd Rundgren, who I actually loved and I still like. But I wrote a negative thing about him, and then I wound up at a party or something where he was at, and I'm like, basically, trying to avoid being spotted. But I'm sure Jan has slagged off so many people.
I have, but I usually think what I think. I mean, I rarely change my mind, and it gets a little embarrassing when you see them. Although the one thing I did change on, and I did as a favor, my mother loved Peter Wolf because she used to be a dancer, and he reminded her of all these jets with. So I think they had some album called Party of Five or something, and it was a lead review, and I panned it, and she was so mad at me. She called me and yelled at me. She goes, "You got to make this up to them." And she'd never even met him, but she thought he was just so hot. So at a later date, I did change my point of view, but I'm pretty resolute. Like when I don't like something or I really like it, I always know. I may have trouble figuring out whether I should get my hair cut or not, or should I buy this or that. But give me, like, the minute I hear something, it's like Blink, like Malcolm Gladwell's Blink. I know what I know.
Yeah. I tell you, a lot of the stuff that I came to love, like especially the Stooges, for our reference here, Stooges. I just, I came to love this, and it's the stuff I don't like at first that I often love the most in the back end. I remember first, wangling a copy of the band's Big Pink album, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? But
I love that album. That's one of my top 5.
It's one. It was when we were trying to put together a list of favorite records, that was in there.
We'll get to that at the end, so stay tuned out there.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit more about somebody who is very close to both of you, the heart and soul of Creem magazine, Lester Bangs. Lester Bangs was kind of like the Philip Seymour Hoffman character in Almost Famous. He had a reputation that preceded him, and you both have different points of view of him. So let's just have you guys talk for a little bit about Lester Bangs.
Yeah, well, I mean, I met him early. It's one of those things. Do you know when you're working with a bunch of people, do you know that one of them's going to be singled out and be famous? This is, before Bob got there, and it was, when he did start having acolytes, but he was just a normal, like, gee shucks kind of guy. He came and he was dressed in a whale suit the first day, because we really did show up the very first day together. And I think because we were the two new kids, because believe me, it was a hard crowd, the Creem staff. Like, it's hard to rub two people together and find a nice one there. It's like we were all opinionated with massive egos, or most of us. But Lester was just, I don't know, he always championed the little guy. He was always amazing to me. We had gone out just to troll around the neighborhood when we got there, and we had run into Wildman Fisher, who I think he was this zany Zappa character, and he was slobbering over Lester. I guess that's my first indication that Lester was somebody, because they were both from California. Well, I don't know if Wildman Fisher really was, but he knew who Lester was and was just fawning over him. And I remember him saying, which I swear it still burns into my mind, he goes, "What's a good looking guy like you doing with an average girl like her?" And I thought, oh my God, that hurt. Lester like defended my honor. And I think because of that, he and I were always close. Like, he was my knight errant. Like, he'd always want to fight my battles. It's like, I think Duncan and I were like his, not that there was that big a difference in our ages, but we were like his two children. Like, I think of anybody, he was probably closest to the two of us. John Morthland later in a different way. But I think we were just kind of his running buddies, people he could get really crazy with.
Yeah. Yeah, he was something else. He really was a great writer, and I think it shows up. I think it shows up in the collections, the Psychotic Reactions in particular, but also the Mainlines Feasts. I forget what the other one's called.
Yeah, Carburetor Dung. No, that's something else. The Carburetor Dung.
Carburetor Dung was the story in Psychotic Reactions,
right?
Yeah. But he really was a great writer, and it was quite intimidating. The character in the book here, I have him working with Lester Bangs, curiously enough, and but I sat at a desk looking at Lester's back, and I tell a story in the book. I remember one night, we used to go drinking every night. We really got to be big bad influences on each other, and but I remember early on, he would procrastinate doing his work, so he would have a shit ton of work would be piled up, and we had deadlines. We had we had to get that magazine to the printer in Montreal, and so you couldn't be late, and so Lester would bring it down to the wire, and then he would I remember him finding in the mess on his desk a bottle of pills. And you would think it would be speed because he likes speed, but it was Valium. And I remember him taking maybe 10 Valiums. I mean, it was a handful of Valium, and throwing it back and washing it down with like a warm beer that was sitting there. And I thought, well, that's going to be great because I think at this point I had some responsibility for helping get the magazine out. And, but yeah, damned if Lester didn't sit there and stay at his desk as he was wont to do for maybe it was 36 hours. It was a really long time. And he wrote a story. He wrote, this might have been the John Denver is God story he wrote, but I got to edit John Denver is God. And he stayed there for like 2 days, and we left. And we came back in, and he had gone to a wedding, so he was wearing a suit that I had helped him buy. I had gone to the suit store with him, and I can't imagine what the salesman in the store. We were such degenerates. Anyways, Lester wore the suit to the wedding, and I guess he kind of liked it, so he kept the suit when he came back, and he stayed in that suit for 36 hours. I don't know what it was, and that suit was so destroyed by his sweat and stink, and he never took it off the whole time. But what he turned out on all who knows what else he was taking along the way, but what he turned out was his John Denver's God article, and it was like a lot of things Lester wrote. It was maybe 80 pages. It was like half a book or more. And I remember it came to me to edit it, and and the thing about Lester was most people write 80 pages, and 5 or 10 of them are good, but with Lester, it was like 40 of the pages were great. And it was almost easy to edit. There was just some shit that just went completely off the rails. And then anything that was remotely on the rails was great. It was, so he was an exceptional talent, but a real madman. I think, struck like a lot of geniuses by he was a little bit crazy. I remember one more thing. I remember his cousin, who he was close to and hung out with when he was a kid, telling at his memorial service telling us before we had the memorial service, talking about there was an abandoned house near where Lester lived. And he used to go in that house and write on the walls. And he would just, until he had eventually filled this whole house with handwriting. And I thought, yeah, that's Lester. But I love that story. That story doesn't get out there.
Yeah, I didn't even know that story.
Yeah. Oh my God.
That was good. And the thing is, with sitting next to him, I sat next to him for 6 years.
Yeah.
The fact was, I thought everybody but me wrote that fast. And for the longest time, I had a phobia about it. Like Ben Edmonds, who was also on staff with us, came to visit me after Creem was over. It was in the early 90s. And we both talked about, like, we thought we had writer's block.
Yeah.
I'd stopped writing to have a daughter, and I went back to school and got a degree. But when I came back out, I thought, oh my God, what the hell? He was extraordinary. I remember after Lester died, and I wrote an obit, and I said, he used to have this crazy like this protuberance for the back of his head. Yeah, and it was like I remember saying it, that it was like he was getting emanations from some other planet. And he wrote so fast, it was almost like, in some metaphysical sense, like he knew he didn't have a lot of time, and he was trying to beat out life and get out as much as he could. Unbelievable, incredible work ethic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about Lester Bangs and Creem magazine. It's all a part of Loudmouth, which Robert Duncan wrote. It's a fictionalized account of growing up and rocking out and leading up to working at Creem magazine, and then actually coming back to New York. You convinced Lester to move to New York, or he probably didn't take much convincing, right?
Well, Lester was always wearing. You see it in so many things. The Detroit, is it on the front of that the Creem doc thing? His Detroit sucks T-shirt, because he liked to make fun of the things he loved and loved things that he made fun of. He was a little bit of a conundrum, but so his Detroit sucks T-shirt was somehow funny that he wore it all over Detroit. But he was always talking about at Pasquale's when we were out drinking our bolos of beer. He's saying, I'm going to go to New York. I'm getting out of this shithole. I'm going to go to New York someday. And he had been there about 5 years, and I came in and out in less than a year and a half, and I was for various reasons. I mean, I stormed out, and I got to New York, and after a few months there, I can't remember how long it was, a few months there, I stumbled on a friend of a friend of a friend told me about what had to be the cheapest apartment in New York City. And it was a decent location. It was like 14th Street. And it was between 6th Avenue, but near 14th Street. So it was right on the edge of the village. And it was a shithole, but it was great. And it was like $150 a month. And even, and this is like the late 70s, even in the late 70s, that was ridiculously cheap. I mean, you didn't have hot heat after 9 o'clock. You didn't have hot water all the time. It had crazy amounts of cockroaches and and mice, and you learn to. I got a tick drinking beer because I learned to always look in the can before I guzzled my beer because there's a cockroach in there, which there was 1 in 5 times. But anyways, so the guy, the old man next door to me, in that apartment, there was only 2 apartments on a floor. It was a 5-story building. He died, and I said to the landlord, "What are you doing with the place?" And he says, "Well, I'm going to rent it." I said, "Well, let me ask my friend." So I called up Lester. I said, "Look, you're always fucking talking about I'm going to move to New York, And New York was to him was the Velvet Underground and Albert Eiler and just all these things and just kind of nastiness. He was raised religious, so it was definitely a satanic. It's the home of Satan. And so I called him up. I said, "Hey, the apartment next door to me is coming free shortly. And, you want me to talk to the landlord, put money down? You want to put some money down on it?" And he said, in that phone call, he said, "Yeah, I'm coming. Wow. Yeah, do it." So and then maybe 6 weeks later, he and his girlfriend arrived, and so we were living next door to each other in New York, and
wow.
and the hijinks resumed.
Yeah. What was the best? You mentioned in Loudmouth the first story he wrote when he got to New York, when he became the darling of New York. What story was that?
Oh,
Elvis had died.
I think I wrote it. He wrote I thought a wonderful obit of Elvis when Elvis died. Yeah. And it's been quoted a lot over the years now, but I remember when I read it, I believe it was in the Village Voice, but I remember reading it thinking, "Oh, fuck, Lester has gone to the next level of it wasn't, he was not drinking or not drinking so much and not drugging so much. He had some stability in his life. He had this, girlfriend who was very nice and sensible and all that stuff. So, I think that helped. I think that helped his writing. Strangely enough, this thing was, he concluded it by saying, the idea that, mass adulation of rock stars or movie stars or whoever, he says, so when Elvis dies, he says, "I don't say goodbye to Elvis. I say goodbye to you." And I thought, that is fucking heavy. And it was great. It got him. I mean, he managed to get himself a lot of attention.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite Lester article that he wrote, Jan?
I do. Actually, I like the deaf mute in a phone booth, the Lou Reed thing, because every time he had one of his confrontations with Lou, it wasn't just the two of them. He always brought us as a posse. So I was there for everything that transpired in that. And it was a little mean-spirited. It was a little, like, do I have to be here? This is really happening. And all that really happened because he and Lou just helped define each other. Like they were really two sides of similar coins, not the same coin. They didn't have anything in common in terms of upbringing, but they brought out some kind of spark of brilliance in each other. And except that it would get to a point where it almost got to fisticuffs, and they would trade insults, but neither of them backed down. I think they both respected that. And for Lester, absolutely, because that was his hero. So I love that. But I also love post-Creem time. He did the history of the British invasion for the Rolling Stone Encyclopedia of Rock, that big oversized orange book. Yeah. It's fine scholarship. You wouldn't think the guy who sometimes alliterated too much and talked about his grandpappy sitting on a rocking chair, or James Taylor's Mark for Death. It's really amazing. Sometimes I have to read it again because it's so well thought of and the points are all made. So it's kind of the yin and yang of Lester.
Oh, you're making me go back to read it. But when you say deaf mute in a phone booth, it reminds me he wrote his own headlines and they were almost always hilariously funny.
Yeah.
His writing could really make you laugh out loud, and sometimes you don't even know what he's talking about. And you're like, and sometimes his references were so, he was secretly, or maybe not so secretly, really well read.
Yeah. Like an autodidact. It's like his head was filled with stuff that you wouldn't think someone that age would know. I mean, now I know a lot of things and I'm getting the references now. I didn't know that. I mean, I did know Albert Ayler, but there were other like jazz bow references.
I didn't either, and he was a total jazz freak.
I know,
right?
Rock freak,
right? But you know, in a lot of ways, Creem helped introduce punk rock, you know, and make it a viable entity way before Rolling Stone was doing that. What do you think? What are some of the highlights you remember, or were there highlights, or did you just think of it all as rock and roll and some of it was just a little faster?
Well, I think it predates. By the time Robert and I left, punk hadn't started. It was just at the cusp. I left around the Sex Pistols time, like in '76. So if there's anything, it's just what Robert was saying, the proto-punk of Iggy and the Stooges and the MC5, and that make me ethic, like there's no rule that we like, and we're gonna like reconstruct society in a kind of musically violent way. So I think that the way we spoke about music, about those particular bands, gave this expression of punk rock and made the writing as visceral as the punk rock, that fuck you kind of mentality. And I think whether it changed the world or did anything else, I think it just gave it this whole lexicon. I mean, Dave Marsh supposedly coined the term punk rock. So that opens up a door, but he certainly didn't mean that. It was more like punk meant make my day punk, kind of Clint Eastwood-esque, but he used it in the context. So
he was writing about Question Mark and the Mysterians.
Yeah, he was, who I love.
Another Michigan band, but
that's right.
And don't forget the Question Mark and the Mysterians. They were kind of, you would describe them as punkish because they had cheesy Farfisa organ. I love them. I love them. I'm friends with Question Mark on Facebook.
I too. It made my day on LinkedIn too. He found me on LinkedIn, and it was like made my day. It's like there are a few things that really have meant a lot to me in my whole life, and that's right up there with my top 3.
That's so cool.
That would be number one. If I
love that band. I used to see them at the Detroit, at the Michigan State Fair, but I always thought it was so ironic and wonderful that the bass players, the bass player from Grand Trunk Railroad used to be in Question Mark. Mel. So
it's wild.
A great band. They're in my Detroit playlist, by the way, even though they're from
clearly you both of you still love music. So now we're coming to the highlight of the show that all our fans out there have been waiting for. Top 5 albums of all time.
During our Creem time, because I've got like I've got 10 maybe, but it's more like I've got current and I've got past. So
let's say during your Creem time, and then we'll say
I can okay. I wrote them down because I can. This is where you go blank. Okay, I love the Rolling Stones. So Between the Buttons, I loved. I love. I love music from Big Pink. I love Axis Bold as Love. My favorite Led Zeppelin band record, which I love Led Zeppelin, is Physical Graffiti. I think it's one of the finest albums known to humanhood. I mean, I love that. I love the White Album. I need some Rolling Stone because I was a both, ambidextrous about the two rivals coming from a Ford and Chevy world. But that's pretty much it. And you got to throw in Kick Out the Jams. If you're from Detroit, it's kind of like our state band.
Yeah.
So that
right.
Well, we overlap almost totally, and just in terms of Michigan State, I wrote them down too because I hate best of lists because it depends on what mood I'm in, and things that I think are classic. I mean, I of course, but I for Michigan I had the Stooges. I thought, well, if I have to pick one, I guess Raw Power, but I did fall in love with the Stooges. Oh shit! I had Stones. If I had to pick one, maybe Exile, but Sticky Fingers and Beggar's Banquet are in there.
Yeah.
Aretha Franklin has given me joy from the beginning to the end. But you asked, what were our favorite 5 albums, and it was like we didn't listen to albums that when I was growing up in the 60s or when I first started buying records, which was right around 1963, I bought 45s. An album was an unusual thing to buy. First of all, you might not have the $2 or $3, but you would have the 69 cents for
Yeah.
the 45. So Aretha Franklin, greatest hits, but also she did, I just for years I listened to the gospel stuff on Sunday, and she did that wonderful jazz album for Columbia before she went to Atlantic, and that's just, I listened to it the other day. That's on that playlist I put together. Who else? I say, oh, Marvin Gaye. He's just that his voice and his sense of arrangement and what's going on. I had to put in there. Dylan's Blood on the Tracks. And I love Big Star, and maybe their first couple of records, and all the other records you had on my list of 5 records was like,
Oh, are you kidding? My list of 5 letters was, oh, you can't even see it because it's paper, old school. Are you kidding? I mean, I could go on and on.
You really, it's not fair to say 5, but
Yeah, but if I said 10, you would say that it wasn't fair to say 10. So then you get to 100, and then it's like, well, how could you leave off this band on your top 100?
I know.
So it goes on, and I'm just glad that music ever became to be recorded. That at all. Yeah. That's a stunning thing, and I think that in some ways, at the time in those 70s, music helped to define, generations and define the groups that you were with. And,
and yourself.
It's different now with streaming, because your streaming allows you access to everything. So those clicks and stuff like that. Well, of course, probably if you're in that, if you're younger, you're going to have like clicks of music that you guys all go to. But I think that the music was broken out by genre so much by the commercial radio, and it used to be much more intermingled, and now it's just like politics, where it's broken out. It's like, if you're like, if you believe this, and this, you are in this group. If you believe this, and this, you're in this group. And intermingling, I think the only way it's going to come back is through music and through more of an intermingling and a cross-pollination of people, introducing people to a lot of different genres. And maybe streaming will eventually do that, I'm hoping. And we'll see.
And I was thinking about my top five records. I had to go back to, when we listened to the radio back in the 60s, I would buy a Stevie Wonder record, and I would buy a, Leslie Gore record, and so you'd buy black, white artists. That really wasn't the point, and they were all played on AM radio.
Right.
Yeah, I kind of love that you have much more Motown and I'm the native. Pal.
Yeah. I was working on my Detroit playlist, so I think it was fresh in my mind. But I mean,
next time we do this, I'm going to prep a little more. I'll try to be more Detroit. Okay.
All right.
Okay. But you are much more Detroit than I am. But
Once again, we're here. We've been talking about Loudmouth, which is a book written by Robert Duncan, and we've been talking with JAAN UHELSZKI, who worked with Robert at Creem magazine, and this is a rock and roll novel, and she is rock and roll. So she also helped produce the Creem documentary. You can watch it now on Amazon Prime, and it's amazing. So you should definitely check it out, especially if you haven't. If you are not familiar with Creem, it's great to hear to see that documentary, see the kind of energy that sheer will can make happen. Kind of like the rock and roll itself. How does a band ever write songs, rehearse, and get on stage and do a half-hour set? How does that ever happen? And how do they ever go on tour and actually stay together without killing each other? It's hard to imagine, but it happened, and it's happening. Oh, we have a Facebook user here who's shared their favorite albums: Sticky Fingers, The Band, London Calling, Alien Lanes, Purple Rain,
Oh, I had all of those. I had all of those except for I forgot Alien Lanes. Guided by Voices is one of my favorite bands ever, and I still go see them. And I still, even though they put out 20 records a year, Robert Pollard puts out 20 records a year. I still buy them all.
Right.
Alien Lanes, yes, you win.
All right.
Anonymous person.
All right. So finally, okay, is it even possible? I mean, is this just an impossible question? Favorite song?
No.
I don't think that's possible.
So possible. Okay. I actually have a favorite song because girls like to categorize favorite colors, favorite whatever, favorite Beatle, favorite song. Let's Spend the Night Together by the Rolling Stones is mine.
Yeah. Wow. All right.
And that's on Between the Buttons, and Between the Buttons, that. But I was like, oh yeah, that was a breakthrough album for them. It was a great.
That's my number one album of all time.
People overlook that record. Everybody talks about Exile, which is probably my favorite, and Sticky Fingers. But damn, that Between the Buttons is, and it's very different. It's got different kind of.
I know, and the dreamy kind of cover too.
Right, and kind of a little English music hall. It's kind of getting over to that Kinks territory.
Mm-hmm.
But God,
so,
I couldn't, I mean, maybe my number one album would be.
No, you got one favorite song.
Would be Revolver. Let's see if I had
five songs. Just name them off, and we'll tell you what your favorite song is. Yeah, it's like a palm reader.
Yeah, I love that.
Oh, I mean, like I said, Revolver. I'm trying to think what's on Revolver. I mean, everything. The Prince. I mean, I was a huge Prince fan. My all-time favorite song? Shit, I don't know. I don't know. I recuse myself, or
how about When Doves Cry? Do you like that song?
Which one?
When Doves Cry.
Doves Cry. I like that. Yeah. I mean, Little Red Corvette and all that. Oh shit. I had okay. One of my all-time favorite songs, and I'll just pick it, is Thunder Road. This is Bruce Springsteen's song.
Right.
And that's always my karaoke song. I do a pretty good Thunder Road. So let's say
I do Band on the Run, but anyway.
I love karaoke. But I was at Creem when that Springsteen Born to Run album came out, and Lester reviewed it. Lester gave it a pretty rave review.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that about wraps it up for us. Unless any of you have any more things you want to add in, Robert.
Well, how much time we got?
I bet.
Well, no, I just that Creem doc is great. Check.
And
Jan is great, and I really appreciate getting together with her here. Kat.
By Loudmouth.
Kat edited my book, and she did.
Oh, great job!
Yeah. So,
wow.
Wait, there you go.
Really, really helped me through some of the funk, and I don't know.
I thought you did this for a living. I honestly thought you did this, that you were more. No, you did a great job. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I like her backdrop.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, Jan, thank you so much for being a part of the show. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll talk about doing a book of yours soon.
Right,
so,
exactly.
Yeah, that'll be killer.
And thank you to everybody out there in Facebook and YouTube land for watching. This is Cat George at Three Rooms Press signing off. Thank you.
Guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.